Hi, welcome to Stories of Art. My name is Karel Huidekoper, and today I want to tell you the story of this wonderful painting of Proserpine by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Well, I say painting, but it's more of a composition because it's a series of paintings that he made in a period of about 11 years, and at least 8 different versions still exist today. But I'll be concentrating on the 2 versions that are in public collections, simply because I have better pictures of those. And it helps that one version is one of the earliest ones and another is, as far as we know, the last one he made. I'm going to pronounce this name, Proserpine, instead of using the Italian Proserpina or the Greek Persephone, because I think that's the way that Rossetti wanted it to be pronounced. And I'll tell you later why I think that. But before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe. You know, it just takes a click on the button below this video and then another click to hit the bell icon for notifications. And you could, of course, even share this video with people you think might be interested. That would really help me grow this channel. But let's get into it. First, a little bit of background. The painter of this work is, of course, Dante Gabriel Rossetti. He had been the founder, or one of the founders, of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. That had been a club of artists who were mainly still students or just starting out in their careers, who were frustrated with their professors at the Royal Academy of Art and decided to form a brotherhood, and they did that in 1848, and there were 7 original members. So besides Rossetti, there were William Holman Hunt, John Everett Millet, William Michael Rossetti, that's the brother of Dante Gabriel, James Collinson, Frederick George Stevens and Thomas Woolner. And it started out simply enough. They got together, they griped about their teachers, and they set up a manifesto that originally they were going to keep secret. In fact, the whole society was to be a secret society, in that they wouldn't talk about it in public, but they would sign their works with their names and the letters PRB for Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Now, from that simple beginning, they became incredibly influential because several of these artists would become quite successful, and especially Rossetti, Holman Hunt and Millet became very famous. And it didn't take them very long to do so either. Each of them would enter paintings for the Royal Academy of Arts exhibitions and often get very positive reviews. And over time, the group became famous in and of itself. So much so that it's one of those things that we learn about when we study art history. So it might surprise you that it only lasted for 5 years, because by 1853 they had started arguing amongst themselves and basically disbanded the Brotherhood. So everyone went on and did their own thing, which, if I'm honest, they already did, because there weren't that many rules to being a member of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood to begin with. I mean, the earliest manifesto stated that there were 4 things they had to do. They were called the 4 doctrines, and they are, and I quote, 1. To have genuine ideas to express. 2. To study nature attentively so as to know how to express them. 3. To sympathize with what is direct and serious and heartfelt in previous art, to the exclusion of what is conventional and self-parading and learned by rote. And 4. Most indispensable of all, to produce thoroughly good pictures and statues. End quote. So that's vague enough. You can basically do anything you want and still follow these rules. But the general idea was that they liked the art and styles that were prominent before the High Renaissance, so before Raphael. Basically, they didn't hate Raphael, but they hated the fact everyone still imitated him more than 3 centuries after his death. It also meant that they were looking for a more history-oriented style and were interested in stories from the Middle Ages like Arthurian legends and mythology. So that's mostly where they got their inspiration for subjects. The group was made up of like-minded people who were basically just friends and colleagues, which meant that they often worked together but not always. And when the group officially fell apart, basically everyone kept doing that. But simply more people were added to the group. It became a bit more of a public thing, and although the Brotherhood didn't survive, working in the Pre-Raphaelite style did. And that meant that it became a much bigger thing than it originally was. For instance, in 1857, Rossetti met William Morris and Edward Burne-Jones in Oxford. They turned out to think similar about several things and decided to work together. And the work of Edward Burne-Jones, I think most people think that he was part of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, but he never was. He was not part of that original group and never signed that manifesto. But he very much worked in the same vein and with a lot of the same people. So I guess you could say that he was part of the Pre-Raphaelite movement, if not the Brotherhood. And so kind of was William Morris, except that he was more interested in reviving old techniques for design and craft that were inspired by the medieval period, but it basically meant they wanted to do things in a pre-industrial revolution way. And Morris was seen as a keen businessman who founded lots of different companies that did lots of different things, and is seen as one of the driving forces behind the arts and craft movement. At some point, William Morris just happened to start another company where he asked Rossetti to come in as a partner, which he did. And this was round about 1857, 1858. And this is the part of the story where the gossip comes in, but only because it's part of the story, because that is, it turns out, the love life of both William Morris and Dante Gabriel Rossetti are important to the story. And actually, when you talk about Rossetti, his many affairs do tend to come up mainly because so often he had his affairs with his models. You see, in the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, they liked to use certain models that they called stunners, women that they found stunningly beautiful. One of those models that Rossetti had used for a long time was Elizabeth Siddal. They met in 1850 and had a long professional relationship where she at first modeled for both him and a number of his colleagues, for instance for Millet in this painting called Ophelia. But at some point Rossetti convinced her that she should only exclusively model for him. And eventually they even got married. That was in 1860. Now that marriage was probably not the happiest one. One of the reasons is that she got sick. She may have had tuberculosis, but she also had a drug addiction to laudanum, which may have eventually killed her, or she may have committed suicide with it. And I guess it couldn't have helped that Rossetti had found other models in the meantime, with whom he most likely had a more than professional relationship. Also, during their relationship, during the 1850s, his style somewhat changed. Where before he had made pictures filled with figures and lots of details and lots of symbolism, somewhere during the 1850s that changed. And he moved more to pictures of beautiful women seen up close, and still with quite a bit of symbolism. But you might say that the models became more and more important to him. And as I said, at first it was mostly Elizabeth Siddal that was seen in pictures like these, but later there was Fanny Cornforth, who started modeling for him in 1858. This is actually the first of his many paintings of women up close, and I feel it has a stronger erotic nature to it, also because of its title, Bocca Baciata, which means the mouth that has been kissed. But then there was another model that was more important to our story here, and she was Jane Burton. She lived in Oxford, where, as you remember, Rossetti worked for a while just after he met Edward Burne-Jones and William Morris. In fact, he was working on some murals with Edward Burne-Jones, and they went to the theatre one night and they noticed this lovely young girl and they asked her to model for them. She agreed to do that, and also through them met William Morris, who made this painting of her. Those two then became romantically involved, that is, William Morris and Jane Burton, and they got married a year later. But after she got married, she continued to model for both William Morris, who was only an occasional painter, but mostly for Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Now, why is this important to us? Well, Jane Burton, or Jane Morris as she was now known, was the model for this painting, a painting of which he made a large number of versions over a long period of time. In fact, he probably started shortly after the three of them rented a house together, and his house was Kelmscott Manor. Rossetti had had some setbacks just before. He had published some poetry which had not been received well, and it may have pushed him further into his already existing substance abuse. So when William Morris asked him to share a house with them, it may well have been to help him cope and get back on his feet. And apparently all three of them were very close. So during the summer of 1871, they rented this Kelmscott Manor, and Morris went to Iceland for business and left Jane and Dante Gabriel together to furnish the house. But it seems they did a lot more than just that, because he started to make a large series of paintings of her that started round about that time, and their relationship is the subject of much debate. And I suppose the relationship between the three of them became, let's say, complicated. But it's safe to say that she was more than his model. She was more his muse. Which brings us finally to the painting. This version, which is in the Tate Gallery in London, is one of the early ones from 1874. This one, in the Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, is the last one he made shortly before his death. Now the subject we see is called Proserpine. That is, the whole series has that title. And Proserpine, or Proserpina, is the goddess that is known to the Greeks as Persephone. She was the daughter of Ceres, or Demeter to the Greek, and she was abducted by her uncle, Pluto, or Hades. He wanted to marry her and make her his queen of the underworld, but her mother cried so bitterly that she could no longer do her duties, and because she was a fertility goddess, nothing could grow on the Earth's surface. Jupiter, or Zeus, decided to intervene and get Proserpina back. But as it turns out, Proserpine had eaten some fruit in the underworld, and in some tellings of the story it's a pomegranate. And the thing is that if you eat anything, but pomegranates in particular, while you are in the underworld, you are forever bound to it. Remember this, you never know when it may come in handy. If you ever find yourself in the underworld and you want to get back, don't eat anything. So for Proserpine, a compromise was needed, which is why she spends half her time with her mother and half her time with her husband in Hades. That also means that only half of the time her mother does her work and things can grow and flourish on Earth, and the other half of her time she's crying and doesn't do anything. According to mythology, this is how seasons started. So the person we see here is Proserpine. This is made clear because she's standing in a gloomy space holding a pomegranate, from which she has taken a slice or a bite, and now she seems to regret being there. In the top right corner there's a piece of paper that seems to have been placed there with nails or tags, but of course all of that is painted. And it contains a poem, a sonnet, by Dante Gabriel Rossetti in Italian. And because he knew that would not reach a great big audience in England, there's a translation of that same poem on the frame. That's because the frame of this painting, as with many works by Rossetti, was designed by him and is part of the work of art. This has everything to do with the fact that he loved medieval art, and this makes it more reminiscent of medieval altarpieces. But in this case he made a different frame for each of the versions of this painting. And on each you can find the title, Proserpine, and this poem in English. So let me attempt to read it for you. Afar away the light that brings cold cheer, unto this wall one instant and no more. Admitted at my distant palace door, afar the flowers of Enna from this drear. Dire fruit, which, tasted once, must thrall me here. Afar those skies from this Tartarian grey, that chills me, and afar, how far away, the nights that shall become the days that were. Afar from mine own self I seem, and wing strange ways in thought, and listen for a sign, and still some heart unto some soul doth pine, whose sound mine inner sense in frame do bring, continually together murmuring, woe me for thee, unhappy Proserpine, by D.G. Rossetti. So apparently Proserpine has to rhyme with pine, which I think Rossetti wanted it to be pronounced that way. But what we can also see on the frame on each of the different designs is that they contain slices of pomegranate, presumably the missing slice from the one she has in her hand. Now on the painting there are several more details that we need to address. First, there's this little earthenware thing that's emanating smoke. I suppose it's an incense burner, as incense was used in Roman funerals. Well, in funerals in general actually, for all kinds of religious reasons I suppose, but also because it covers unwanted smells. But that also makes it part of the symbolism of the underworld. By the way, just below it you see a scrap of paper, or a scroll rather of paper, that says this was painted by Rossetti and the year he made that particular version. Now behind her head and besides her face you can see some ivy. Now ivy can be associated with all kinds of things, two of which could be part of this story. You see there's the Greek god Hymenaios, who was the god of weddings, and he had ivy as his attribute. But in later Christian periods it was adapted and came to symbolize eternal love, but also eternity and also death, which is why you see ivy carved on quite a few tombs. And of course this painting is about both death and marriage, and also eternity. Now obviously it's very attractive to read a lot of the personal developments in the lives of these people into this painting. It seems that Jane Morris spent part of her time with her husband William Morris and part of her time with Rossetti, who apparently became much more productive when she was there. A bit like Ceres, who could only do her job when Proserpine was around. But it seems a little bit at odds with the fact that he simply sold these paintings. They were not private musings about their relationships. For instance, this version was made as a commission for Frederick Richard Leland. He was a rich shipping magnate and a very big art collector. There's even a picture of Leland's drawing room where we can see a series of paintings by Rossetti, and this is one of them. You can see it right there. Most of the other versions were sold through Charles Augustus Howell. He was an art dealer that represented Rossetti for a substantial part of his career. And by the way, he was also a very contentious figure that did the weirdest things during his life. And I really should make a video about him as well. But suffice it to say here that he inspired one of the main villains for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle to oppose Sherlock Holmes. But all the different versions that still exist seem very similar. The pose is always exactly the same. The main difference seems to be the lighting of the scene. Some are much darker than others. And in the final version, she is suddenly a redhead instead of the brownish color she has in all the other versions. So which one do you prefer? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see this one for real, well, you need to go to several different museums. There's of course this version, which is in the Tate Gallery in London, and then there's this one, which is in Birmingham. And if you want to see another one, apparently you should befriend Andrew Lloyd Webber, because I've been told he has one of these in his personal collection. But before you run off, please remember to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you again soon.